Chapter 22 The Clash, Part 1.
And then I said, I believe in you! Do you believe in me? And Nerdy held that wagon together all the way down. Zoom, zoom, whoosh!
Pinkie made a series of dramatic whooshing sounds as she waved her hooves through the air, pantomiming a wagon bouncing through heavy waves. Shucks, Applejack breathed. You mean to tell me that y'all were actually on the island when the thing fell? Rarity shuddered.
I still don't believe that we made it out of there, even with Pinkie's sense.
Oh, I'm so glad you guys got my invitations!
Pinkie cheered.
I didn't realize that I lost them for days! And Twy didn't give me so many of those weatherproof envelopes that I can just pull them out of my mane, you know? And it's a good thing we found them too,
Rainbow said. She poked at the cake crumbs on her plate with a fork.
Totally just about lost it when we realized the island was missing.
We all did,
Fluttershy added. Speaking of, Applejack said, straightening up and scanning the busy garden with narrowed eyes. Where did that filly go and get off to?
She said she needed some air,
Rarity said.
The poor dear seemed awful stressed.
She neglected to add that she had caused much of that stress herself. Air? Applejack echoed. We're already outside.
My lady?
Rarity's ears perked up as she turned to see Pontius approaching the table. He came to a stop a respectful couple steps away, dipping into a stiff bow that he awkwardly swept across the 5-seated mares.
Good evening, darling,
Rarity said. She turned to her friends with a wan smile.
Have I introduced you ladies to Pontius here?
You haven't.
Rainbow leaned over the table with an excited grin.
But that doesn't mean we didn't hear you two are engaged.
Fluttershy's gasp was cut off with a sudden gag. She thumped her chest with a hoof, spitting out a half-chewed wad of cake.
What?
Applejack gave Fluttershy a few heavy pats on the back as she turned a suspicious gaze on Pontius. I've been doing some mighty wondering about that myself. What's the story here, Rarity?
Did you finally meet the stallion of your dreams, Rarity?
Rainbow squished her cheeks together in an exaggerated kissy face before breaking down into a raspy chortle.
I didn't know you were into younger ponies. Hey, don't make fun of Pontius Nick Snacker Cracker,
Pinkie said. She bounced out of her seat and pulled the wide-eyed Pontius into a tight hug.
He's a good pony.
Thank you, Pinkie, Pontius said. It's a pleasure to meet my Lady Rarity's companions.
It's very nice to meet you, Pontius,
Fluttershy whispered. She kept her eyes on her plate. Rainbow Dash had devolved into quiet snickering, while Applejack's withering gaze remained fixed on the young stallion.
Now, girls, be nice,
Rarity said. She gave Pontius a quick, encouraging smile before turning back to her friends.
It's a political arrangement is all. It's not a big deal.
Not a big deal, huh? Applejack arched a brow.
Well, what? Political arrangement?
Rainbow floated out of her chair, dashing over the table to Rarity's side and lowering her voice.
Do you need me to beat him up for you?
Rarity gave Rainbow her best sit back down, please smile.
Not now, darling.
So, later then?
Rainbow asked. Rarity let out a polite little laugh and gave the Pegasus a friendly shove, speaking slowly through clenched teeth.
Everything is fine, Rainbow Dash.
Rainbow cocked her head.
We'll talk later.
With a lazy roll, she drifted back over the table and plopped back into her seat. Rarity let out a breathy chuckle as she turned to Pontius, who was in the midst of a feeble attempt to pry Pinkie off of him.
So, Pontius, these are my charming friends.
She pointed to each in turn.
Applejack, Rainbow Dash, and Fluttershy. There's Twilight Sparkle as well, though she's not here right now. And this here is Pontius, girls, my fiancé.
Pontius dipped his head to the mares as they were introduced. Lady Rarity is a very graceful mare. She's an example to nobility everywhere. Rarity saw the confusion on her friends' faces at the word nobility. Her pulse quickened as she realized that they weren't yet aware of her newfound status as a countess. Luckily, none of them questioned it outright. A loud, rising bugle cut through the chatter of the crowd, drawing all eyes to the top of the manor stairs. An aging Pegasus in a crisp orange uniform lowered the horn raised to his lips, drawing in a deep breath before throwing his voice over the yard with surprising volume. Duke Titus of Cantathusia, 5th Lord of Pikes, victor of the War of Nettle Aggression, liege of the Eastern Counties. The Pegasus dipped his head and flared his wings, stepping back. At the same time, Duke Titus stepped forwards to stand between the towering marble columns carved into the likeness of his progenitors. A thick white robe embroidered with a pattern of glittering orange pikes was draped over his back, and a pike and shield had been sewn into the silk of the vest he wore over his polished breastplate. My ponies, Titus called. How do you find the festivities? An appreciative round of cheers and hoof-stomping applause rose up from the villagers scattered over the garden. Rarity joined in with polite clapping of her own, shooting the reluctant Applejack and Rainbow Dash pointed looks until they joined in. Pinkie Pie's ecstatic whooping could be heard over it all. Good! Titus shouted, quieting the crowd. He passed his gaze over the party, a small smile on his face. You've worked hard and honest for your lord, and you deserve this reward. Again, the cheers. Behind her, Rarity heard Rainbow Dash saying,
I thought this whole thing was Pinkie's idea.
Pinkie's work, too, Applejack added. Titus waved for silence, and the villagers were quick to comply. I have an announcement to make today, and I expect you to celebrate twice as hard and to work the same when you return to your homes. A nervous tingle passed through Rarity. She fluffed her mane with a hoof, her eyes darting between the ponies around her, all looking up to their lord. She knew what the announcement was, of course. She had expected that Titus would have some motive for allowing Pinkie to throw her party besides friendliness. Once he told the world about the deal she had struck with him, there would be no going back. Word would race from village to village, to the ears of the neighboring nobility, across the island, and from there across Equestria. Anybody who cared to know would learn that she was betrothed to Pontius, and she would be locked in. You all know my son, Lord Pontius. Some of you have even met the beautiful Countess Rarity, who recently aided him in capturing the very band of outlaws who have been harassing you for the past 2 months. And you'll be pleased to know that those very outlaws are sitting in my dungeon this very moment, wondering whether or not they should jump. He paused to give the crowd some time to jeer. Some of them glanced over to Rarity. She answered the looks with a thin-lipped smile. As of yesterday, Countess Rarity is betrothed to my dear lad Pontius, and you're all to return here within the month to witness their wedding. The crowd was louder than ever before. Rarity turned back to her friends and saw them each clapping and cheering with varying levels of excitement and suspicion. A few villagers approached her table with slurred congratulations and well wishes, and she answered them all with a smile. The cheers grew louder, rising in pitch, and for a moment, Rarity looked up to Titus thinking she had missed something he had said. She frowned as she saw him shouting at the soldiers that had been standing in front of the columns to either side of him. They were all crouched low, looking towards the gate. Rarity flinched as the night was illuminated by a flash of light from the far side of the garden. Through squinted eyes, she saw chunks of stone arcing through the air before crashing back onto the crowd. And it was at that moment that Rarity realized that the cheers had not gotten louder. They had turned into screams. She jumped to her hooves, trying to see the source of the explosion through the rush of the crowd. She caught glimpses of grim-faced ponies in green uniforms surging through a cloud of acrid smoke against the far wall, running down the fleeting villagers. Another explosion flared up, this time from the wall nearest her table, and she was knocked to the grass by the shockwave.
My lady!
Verity spat grass out of her mouth, looking up to see Pontius hovering protectively above her.
We must get you inside! What's happening?
Verity asked, rolling to her hooves.
Nettlekiss,
Pontius hissed.
The coward mare is attacking us during a festival.
Rarity shrieked as a chunk of stone fell onto the table where her friends had been sitting around just a moment before, shattering it like a toy. A sharpened spear tip jutted out of the rubble. The ear-piercing rapport of gunfire skipped across the yard.
Oh my goodness, oh my goodness!
Fluttershy was on the ground, hooves and wings over her face.
Come on, Shy. Ain't time for panicking yet,
Applejack said, heaving the shivering Pegasus off the ground.
Stand those hooves, you hear? I gotta get out of here first.
A trio of soldiers in orange tabards broke through the thinning crowd at a gallop. Two of them veered off, charging into a group of approaching Nettlekiss soldiers, while the third came to a stop in front of Pontius.
My lord, my lady, come with me.
A persistent ringing lingered in Rarity's ears from the most recent explosion. She clenched her teeth as she looked back to her friends. Pinkie Pie was helping Fluttershy along, while Applejack was in the middle of an argument with Rainbow Dash.
Concern it, Rainbow! Will you cool your jets for once in your life?
I've been training for this, AJ.
The Pegasus shot back.
I've gotta find Saber. She has my wing blades. Don't worry about me.
With the powerful beat of her wings, Rainbow swept her tail out of the way of Applejack's jaws and disappeared into the chaos of the night.
Damn that filly!
Applejack turned back, meeting Rarity's gaze.
Y'all stick together and stay safe, you hear? I'm gonna go catch that mare and knock some sense into her. Applejack, wait!
Rarity reached out, but the cow pony was already gone. With green-garbed soldiers closing in, she had no choice but to follow Pinkie and Fluttershy back towards the safety of the manor. Gava floated in lazy circles from on high, watching as the throngs of partying peasants collapsed in the face of the sudden assault. Firebombs thrown from the deck of the rock screech twinkled like shooting stars as they crashed into the garden below, the flames catching on carefully trimmed bushes and trees and turning them into towering gouts of fire. She scanned the burgeoning battlefield with a veteran eye. The defenders were still trying to get into formation and escort wounded peasants to safety. It didn't look like any of them had noticed the airship hovering overhead yet, even as it continued to bombard the yard. She spotted Sea Saber and Flintlock cut off from Titus's forces and carving an aggressive path back to safety. Her wingtips twitched at the thought of diving down to confront her old enemies, but she held back. She had other business to attend to first. Titus stood on the steps, barking orders at his soldiers as an assistant approached with armor plates to supplement the breastplate he wore under his silk vest. He waved the armor off, beckoning instead for a pair of wing blades, and held his wings out while the deadly weapons were secured to his sides. He pushed the assistant back the moment he was satisfied, shouting some nonsense as he led a charge of 6 soldiers forwards into the melee. Gava did one more lap above the battle, before folding her wings in and allowing herself to fall. She angled herself towards the Duke's back like an arrow, extending her talons for a quick, killing blow from above. Her beak twisted into a predatory grin as the wind tugged at her feathers, carrying with it the scent of pony blood. It was time for a hunt. An orange-clothed soldier looked up at the last moment, face paling as he met her eyes. He shouted something indistinguishable over the roar of the wind and tackled Titus, pushing him away from the strike. Gava scowled as her talons dug into commoner flesh. The soldier's scream was cut short as she severed his windpipe and spine before rolling off his collapsing body. She bounced back up in an instant, flaring her wings out to catch her midair and drawing her revolver. The Duke let out a snarl as he turned to the fallen soldier. His eyes traveled from the fresh corpse to the killer.
Griffin. Pony?
Gavin lined her revolver up with his head and pulled the hammer back.
My lord!
Gavin grunted as the soldier slammed into her from the side. She rolled with the blow, using her weight to swing the white-coated Pegasus mare underneath her. The mare's wings flapped uselessly beneath the Griffin's weight as Gavin stuffed her revolver into her belly and pulled the trigger 3 times in quick succession. The mare went still. The smell of cordite stung at Gavin's senses. She turned around, leveling the gun for another shot, just in time to see Titus launch himself at her with a wordless roar. He lowered his head, barreling past her outstretched arm as she pulled the trigger. Gavin cursed, dropping onto her back and scoring her lion claws across the metal covering his belly before kicking him over her head. The Pegasus twisted midair, using his wings to ensure he landed hoof first before throwing himself at her once more. Still on her back, Gavin brought her gun around for a snapshot. The barrel spat fire, and a blossom of red burst from Titus's chest. The impact threw him off balance, forcing him to the ground. Both fighters scrambled off the ground. Gavin aimed center mass and pulled the trigger, but instead of the booming report of gunpowder, she was rewarded with the barely audible click of the hammer striking an empty chamber.
Seems you're out of rounds, Griffin.
Duke Titus coughed blood as he spread his stance.
Think you can handle an old warrior without your toy?
Gava scowled as she slid the revolver back into its sheath. Looking around, she saw ponies of both colors clashing in isolated pockets, but none paying attention to them.
And you're out of lives. There's nobody left to save you. My great-granduncle killed a griffin, you know,
the Duke said. The rain bounced off his bloodied armor with quiet applause, catching the flickering glow of the burning shrubbery. He took a step closer.
I'm looking forward to adding a trophy of my own next to his. And I'm looking forward to giving you a painful death,
Gava said. Taking a single step back, she crouched low to the ground and pounced. The Duke stepped to the side, raising a wing to slice through her flank, but she was expecting as much. Gava snapped a wing open and twisted midair, talons digging into his exposed shoulders. Titus pushed into the pounce with a grunt, slamming into Gava's chest and knocking the breath out of her. She fell onto her back just long enough for the Pegasus to get a cut in on her belly before one of her paws kicked out, the claws scraping across his face with a splash of blood. He grit his teeth and stumbled backwards, trying to shake the blood from his eyes. Gava threw herself at him paws first, throwing him onto his back as her lion claws sunk into his chest. He glared up at her through the blood and rain as she lifted a taloned hand for the killing strike. She answered with a cocky grin.
Nice try, little pony. Gava!
Gava looked up, eyes narrowing towards the raspy voice that had called her name. The rainbow blur racing towards her was easy to pick out even in the chaos of the night, and she jumped off of Titus with a powerful kick, narrowly avoiding the rainbow-maned Pegasus's charge.
So, can't you wait just 2 seconds?
Her eyes shot open as the Pegasus reversed direction with a single flap of her wings. She spread her own wings, pushing herself to the side to avoid the second charge.
Didn't you learn your lesson last time?
The Pegasus re-angled for a third charge. Gava braced herself to accept the blow, ready to use her greater strength and size in a grapple, only to squawk in surprise as her opponent twisted midair and delivered a rising kick to her jaw. Stars burst in her eyes. The wind tugged at her feathers, and she wasn't sure if she was falling or not. She let instinct take over and splayed her wings, slowing her movement. When her vision cleared, she was hovering a dozen feet over the battlefield with an angry blue Pegasus in front of her.
Okay,
Gavin said, rubbing her jaw.
so you've learned some things. My name is Rainbow Dash,
The Pegasus said, leveling a hoof on her.
and I'm going to make you hurt. That's so.
Gava eyed Rainbow's stance. Fiery, but far more controlled than before. And familiar. She began to fly a slow circle around the Pegasus, turning side on to hide the holstered revolver on her chest behind her spread wings. She pulled it free, holding it close, and flicked the cylinder open.
Saber's been teaching you?
Rainbow grinned. The glint in her remaining eye made for a harsh contrast with the plain black of her eye patch.
She has.
She spread her wings wide, showing off the polished edges of her wing blades.
Those look pretty sharp.
Gava opened the ammo pouch next to her holster and began fishing out rounds. Hours of practice came into effect as she started slipping them into place without looking.
Just keep talking a bit longer, dye job. I'm surprised Saber lets you play with them. You accidentally cut anything on your blind side yet? Shut up.
Rainbow snapped.
You are a monster and I'm here to put you down. Not very creative, are you?
Gava asked. The third bullet slid into place.
You called me a monster last time, remember? When I ate your eye?
Rainbow just growled at her. The hatred in her gaze was murderous, and for a second it looked as if she was going to attack. With 6 bullets in the cylinder, Gava flicked it shut and pulled the hammer back. Rainbow's ears twitched at the click of the gun cocking. A moment of alarm flashed on her face as Gava began to lift her arm. A strong gust of wind blew by as the rain grew heavier. Rainbow threw herself forward just as Gava pulled the trigger. The flash from the barrel lit the sky like lightning. And like lightning, Rainbow had closed the gap. Gava cursed as the Pegasus slipped past her outstretched arm and raked a blade down its length. She drew her injured gun hand back as she lashed out with her other talon. Rainbow danced away from the strike, and Gava snapped off a second shot. She hissed as the recoil jarred her wound, while the bullet went wide.
Hold still, you gaudy chicken!
Gava closed the distance before Rainbow could recover from her dodge, and lashed out with her talons. Rainbow pulled back as expected, and Gava pressed on. She knew that she couldn't let up. The Pegasus had almost been a match for her with neither training nor weapons, and now Gava didn't even have the tight confines of an airship to throw her weight around. For the first time that night, she felt the thrill of uncertainty. The hunt had become a battle, and the adrenaline in her veins was rapturous. She aimed the revolver in one direction, landing a solid kick on Rainbow's wing as she dodged away from the anticipated shot. Rainbow grunted, thrown to the side by the blow, and dipped down just as Gava pulled the trigger again, parting her mane with a shot. Rainbow swept in with one wing extended for a slash. Gava threw herself into the attack, locking her free talon around the Pegasus's neck and squeezing.
Gotcha.
The Pegasus lashed out with all 4 hooves as she struggled to breathe, but Gava had the reach advantage. She brought up her hind legs and raked her claws over the pony's gut. Rainbow screamed, using her wings to twist herself around and break Gava's grip. In the same motion, she extended both blades, scoring a pair of deep cuts across Gava's belly. Gava pulled back, panting. She raised her gun for a shaky 4th shot, but Rainbow knocked her aim off with a powerful gust of wind from her wings. Combined with the recoil of the gun, Gava nearly lost her grip on it. She let out a bitter chuckle as the hardening rain bit at her wounds. She clutched at her bleeding stomach with one hand while the other holstered her revolver.
Really? Oh, fuck you. You still got some bullets left, don't you?
Rainbow asked through clenched teeth. Her wings faltered, and she dipped dangerously before recovering.
I'll let you shoot yourself if you ask nicely.
Gava let out a shrill eagle cry as she launched herself forwards. Rainbow tried to dodge, but her injured wing was too slow. The two collided midair and tumbled to the ground in a ball of biting, kicking, and cutting. Gava's injured hand went limp as they fell onto an armored body, and Rainbow seized the chance to roll away. By the time Gava had regained her bearings and scrambled off the ground, Rainbow was already standing on shaky hooves. Gava clacked her beak as her injured leg threatened to give away.
I need to end this now.
Movement behind Rainbow caught her eye, and she scowled as she recognized Sea Saber and Flintlock galloping towards them.
Rainbow Dash!
Saber shouted, drawing Rainbow's attention. Get out of the way!
I've got this, Saber!
Rainbow yelled back. She returned her eye to Gava's.
Fuck this.
Gava spread her wings, thankful that she hadn't taken any injuries to them.
You lucked out this time, die job.
Rainbow tensed as if ready to pounce, only to stiffen as Saber called out again. Rainbow, you're in the shot! Gava pushed off the ground and threw herself into gaining altitude. A trio of shots from Flint's repeater tracked through the night sky. The first two went wide, and the third clipped her hind leg. A hiss escaped her as she dove into a cloud of smoke. She closed her eyes and held her breath, using her natural senses to angle herself upwards. She burst out of the cloud a few seconds later, dirty and wounded, but alive. Scanning the sky, she picked out the shape of the rock screech pulling away. She frowned, looking down, and realized that the fight was already over. The last of Nettlekiss's troops either turned tail and fled, or threw themselves to the ground in surrender as Titus's surviving defenders seized the burning yard. She let out a heavy sigh.
Those little ponies sure went fast.
Despite her pride, Gava recognized that she was in no shape to keep fighting. She angled herself towards the screech, replaying the fight with Rainbow over in her head. A brilliant lavender light illuminated the sky, and Gava was pushed back by a sudden gust of wind. For a brief second, the rain seemed to abate, before returning twice as hard. A sense of dread overcame her as she squinted into the light. The rock screech fell out of the sky in two parts. Gava saw a ball of flickering purple and rolling black floating in the sky for just a moment, before, with a flash, it vanished.